People always say that when you finally meet the right person, everything in life falls into place. What they never tell you is that the right person can be carrying the wrong secrets, and by the time those secrets come to light, they can destroy everything you believed about love. I learned that lesson in the most painful way imaginable. My name is Nick Dimitriou, and the woman I was preparing to marry taught me that trust is much easier to give than it is to rebuild. I was 35 years old and owned a successful commercial real estate company in Birmingham, Michigan. My life was stable, my business was thriving, and my family was the center of everything I did. We were a loud Greek-American family that believed no celebration was complete without everyone gathered around the same table. Every Sunday, my mother cooked enough food to feed twice the number of people expected. My Uncle Theo showed up whenever he felt like it, and my father constantly reminded me that a good reputation would always outlast money. Those values shaped the man I became, and I never imagined they would also save me from making the biggest mistake of my life. Then Megan walked into my world. She was intelligent, confident, beautiful, and somehow fit into my family almost immediately. She laughed at my uncle's terrible jokes, helped my mother in the kitchen without ever being asked, and treated everyone with warmth that felt completely genuine. Watching her become part of my family happened so naturally that I never questioned whether she truly belonged there. After 14 incredible months together, I proposed on a rooftop overlooking downtown Detroit. Before I even finished asking the question, she smiled through happy tears and said yes. Driving home that night, I honestly believed I had found the woman I would grow old beside. The only part of her life that remained a mystery was her family. Early in our relationship, she explained that she had cut all contact with her parents years ago. According to Megan, they had been controlling, emotionally abusive, and impossible to have a healthy relationship with. She spoke about it calmly, without anger or bitterness, as though she had accepted that chapter of her life and simply wanted to move forward. I never doubted her because she had never given me a reason to. When you truly love someone, trust feels automatic. As our wedding drew closer, my family naturally became curious. Nobody wanted to judge her parents or pressure her into reconnecting with them. They simply believed that when two families joined together, everyone should know where the other came from. During one Sunday dinner, Uncle Theo finally asked the question everyone else had politely avoided. "Megan, where are your parents?" The room instantly became silent. She smiled politely and repeated the same explanation she had given me months earlier. She was no longer in contact with them and preferred not to discuss it. Everyone respected her answer, but later that evening my father quietly pulled me aside in the kitchen. He poured himself a glass of wine before looking directly into my eyes. "Nick, I believe you love her," he said. "I also believe she loves you. But before you promise someone forever, make sure you know the whole story." His words stayed with me for days, yet I still wasn't suspicious. In fact, I worried about something completely different. I imagined her parents were wealthy professionals who might think I wasn't sophisticated enough for their daughter. I pictured elegant people living in a luxurious home who might quietly judge my loud family traditions or believe we weren't good enough. Looking back now, that fear seems almost laughable. A week later, Megan completed paperwork to move into one of the luxury condominiums owned by my company. While reviewing the documents, I noticed something that immediately caught my attention. The last name on her legal identification wasn't the one she used socially. Curious more than concerned, I searched public records and found an address connected to that name in Saginaw, Michigan. The following Saturday, I drove there without telling anyone. The entire drive I rehearsed introductions in my head, expecting to meet intimidating strangers. Instead, the GPS led me into a quiet neighborhood filled with modest ranch homes, trimmed lawns, and flower beds. I stopped in front of a simple house where an older man wearing a faded Detroit Tigers shirt was calmly watering flowers near the porch. Nothing about that scene matched the wealthy family I had imagined. I walked toward him, introduced myself, and quietly said I was engaged to his daughter, Megan. The garden hose slipped from his hands. He stared at me in complete disbelief before calling for his wife with a voice that cracked under the weight of emotion. A few minutes later, I was sitting at their kitchen table drinking coffee while homemade cookies rested untouched in front of me. Every wall of that small home was covered with photographs of Megan growing up. Birthday parties, graduation ceremonies, family vacations, and smiling parents standing proudly beside the daughter they clearly loved more than anything. At that moment, before a single difficult conversation even began, I realized something wasn't adding up. These were not the faces of cruel or abusive parents. These were the faces of two people who had been waiting years for someone to finally knock on their door. Gerald Bennett quietly explained that he had spent 31 years delivering mail while his wife, Nancy, worked as a school secretary. Together, they had sacrificed for decades to make sure Megan graduated from the University of Michigan without debt. They spoke about her with pride instead of resentment, remembering every achievement as though it had happened yesterday. Then Gerald's voice became softer as he described how everything slowly changed after Megan moved to Detroit. Phone calls became shorter, visits became less frequent, and eventually she began introducing herself with a different last name. The final blow came when she demanded $100,000 for her dream wedding. They offered $15,000, every dollar they could spare without destroying their retirement, but it wasn't enough. That same night, she blocked both of them and disappeared from their lives. Nancy quietly opened a kitchen drawer and placed several unopened birthday cards in front of me. Every envelope had been returned without ever being opened. I could barely process what I was seeing when my phone vibrated. It was a text from Megan saying she had wonderful news. According to her, her parents had apologized, wanted to meet me for lunch the next day, and were excited to become part of our future. I slowly looked up from my phone at the couple sitting across from me. Her real parents had no idea they were being replaced by an entirely different story. Driving back to Detroit, I realized I wasn't dealing with a misunderstanding. I was uncovering a carefully built lie. I never confronted Megan that night. Instead, I watched and listened. Over the following days, she casually mentioned her wealthy boss, Robert Callahan, and his wife, Vivian, so often that it became impossible to ignore. Then she arranged a lunch. At an upscale restaurant in West Bloomfield, she introduced Robert and Vivian as her parents without the slightest hesitation. My heart sank, but I smiled through the entire meal. Megan told stories about family vacations that never happened, while Vivian politely agreed, and Robert confidently played the role of a proud father. It felt rehearsed, but I could also see they believed they were helping someone they cared about, rather than participating in a deception. Rather than exposing them in the restaurant, I invited all of them to an engagement dinner with my family the following weekend. They happily accepted. That same evening, I drove back to Saginaw and asked Gerald and Nancy to attend as well. Neither of them wanted revenge or an argument. They simply wanted one opportunity to stand in the same room as the daughter they had not seen in 2 years. Gerald quietly nodded and said they would be there. When the evening finally arrived, our favorite Greek restaurant looked beautiful. Candles flickered across white tablecloths while both families gathered for what Megan believed would be a celebration. She walked into the room glowing with confidence beside Robert and Vivian, completely convinced her carefully created life would remain untouched. Dinner was warm and cheerful until I slowly stood and tapped my glass. Every conversation stopped. Megan smiled, expecting a romantic toast. I thanked everyone for coming before repeating something my father had taught me years earlier. I said that the people sitting at your table tell the world exactly who you are, and before celebrating our future, I wanted to make sure the right people were present. Then I nodded toward the restaurant manager. A second later, the private dining room door opened, and Gerald and Nancy Bennett quietly walked inside. The color disappeared from Megan's face instantly. Her hands trembled so badly she almost dropped her wine glass. Robert and Vivian looked from the elderly couple to Megan with complete confusion. Calmly, I explained how I had driven to Saginaw, met her real parents, seen the family photographs covering every wall, heard about the sacrifices they had made, and held the unopened birthday cards they had tried sending for years. Then I reminded everyone that while I had been sitting in their kitchen, Megan had texted me claiming those same parents had suddenly apologized and wanted to meet me. Finally, I turned toward Robert and Vivian and told them I knew they had been deceived just as I had. They had agreed to help someone they believed was alone, never realizing they were replacing 2 loving parents who were still alive. Neither of them spoke. Robert quietly placed his napkin on the table while Vivian stared at Megan with heartbreaking disappointment. I removed the engagement ring from my pocket and gently placed it in front of her. I told her I could forgive mistakes, but I could never build a marriage on a foundation that required erasing the people who loved her first. I picked up the centerpiece flowers and handed them to Nancy. She broke down in tears as my mother wrapped her in a hug. My father shook Gerald's hand with quiet respect, and together our families walked out of the restaurant, leaving behind every lie Megan had spent years creating. Outside in the cool Detroit evening, my father rested his hand on my shoulder and quietly told me my grandfather would have been proud. At that moment, I understood I hadn't lost the love of my life. I had escaped the greatest mistake of it.